Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast. I'm Paris Jackson, host of the news feed on Cascade PBS, and your host for this podcast. Today we're talking about restarting life when everyone has an opinion about you from the perspective of Amanda Knox. Back in 2007, Knox, then a college student from Seattle, made international headlines after her college roommate, Meredith Kercher, was murdered, and she was accused of the crime. Criminal podcast host Phoebe Judge sat down with Knox at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival to learn where her life is now after being accused, twice convicted, and twice acquitted. In this conversation, Knox recounts the night in 2011 she learned she would be released from an Italian prison. She also talks about why she calls a portion of her life a born identity phase and the unconventional method she took to confront the man who prosecuted her. You'll learn about the criminal justice advocacy work Knox does now to help those wrongly convicted avoid the traps she fell into and what she plans to tell her children about the world. Let's listen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. I'm Phoebe Judge, host of the Criminal Podcast. In 2009, Amanda Knox was convicted in an Italian court for the murder of her roommate, Meredith Kercher. Years later, she was acquitted and began the process of figuring out what came next. Amanda Knox, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with the day you got out of prison in 2011. What do you remember about that day?
Oh, wow. So it was the middle of the night, first of all. We got a very, very late in the middle of the night verdict. And I spent almost the entire day in the office of the prison chaplain, Don Salo, who had become my dearest friend in prison. And we talked together, he held my hand, we cried, and he was 100% convinced that I was going home. So much so that he had me play the song that he had taught me how to play on the piano in his office, and he had secretly brought in a tape recorder to record it because he said that he wanted to be able to hear my voice again after I left. And that was a big thing for me because at that point in my journey, I didn't have faith in the criminal justice system anymore. It had already failed me once, and so I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen when I walked back into that courtroom. And so it was handed down. I was going home. I was driven back to the prison, not in a prison van like a caged animal, but in a police car, and the entire prison, which I'd been watching on TV, erupted in cheers. Everyone screaming, "Libertà, libertà, libertà," banging pots and pans on the window panes. And I was given a very short amount of time to rush back into my cell, gather a few of my belongings, break my toothbrush, which is customary.
Why?
So you break your toothbrush so that you yourself don't go back to prison. It's a lucky thing, kind of like salt over your shoulder. So you break your own toothbrush, and then when you leave, you also brush your foot against the threshold going out of the prison to carry the next person with you. So you did all of those little rituals. And then I was put into a car and entered into my born identity phase of my life, where I was being chased by paparazzi and helicopters, and that lasted for a while.
I mean, I've always wondered, did you feel like at any moment they can say this is a mistake? When the wheels get up, I'm okay?
I mean, I think that I lived in a state of surreality for a good week, especially when, this born identity phase of my journey, when I had to be driven to a safe house because it was in the middle of the night and the flight to take me home wasn't until the next morning. And so I was driven to this safe house where a secret place outside of Rome, some supporter had, and I was there with my mom and an ex-FBI agent who I just met for the first time, who was like our bodyguard. And we finally laid our heads to rest, and I found that I couldn't bring myself to fall asleep, not just because of the adrenaline rush, but I was sitting there in this chair, I'll never forget, just watching my mom sleep. And I was so afraid of closing my eyes, because I thought, if I wake up, I'm going to wake up back in a prison cell. Like, this is all a dream. And the FBI agent came into the room at a certain point to check on us, and he was like, "What are you doing, you creep? You're just staring at your mom." and I was just like, I don't know if this is real. And he was the one who was like, "This is real. You are going home."
Your case was all over the news, all over the world. While you were in prison, how did you experience that celebrity? How much of that did you know was going on?
Yeah, celebrity wouldn't be the word that I would put to it. It wasn't a good thing to be the most famous one in prison. Let's just say that. And there are complicated political nuances to that. I think the biggest and most human level one being that the vast majority of the women that I was imprisoned with were forgotten. No one cared about them. And so they looked at me and saw, politicians coming to the prison to just do a prison visit, but really to come straight to my cell so that they could say that they talked to the infamous Amanda Knox. And of course, everyone followed the case, and it meant that I was living under constant scrutiny even while I was in a prison cell, which made for a very lonely existence, a lonely and often paranoid, hypervigilant existence. I journaled a lot to get to process what was happening to me, but occasionally what would happen is there was one particular roommate of mine who was I think she was suffering from some kind of paranoia, mental illness. She was convinced that I was writing only about her. And so I came back to my cell one day to find her just ripping my journals to shreds. But that's one thing. It's another thing for guards to confiscate your journals and then publish them and out of context. So to be under that level of scrutiny, I was aware of in the prison environment to a certain extent. But then it was a whole other level to come home to every single news channel having my face and my name, people coming to the airport, and in a lot of times supportive ways. Like, it wasn't just, paparazzi and people, like, it wasn't just me having to show up at a press conference. There were also people like holding up signs saying, "Welcome home, Amanda." My local record store said, "Welcome home, Amanda." And I was just like, what is happening right now? Like, and here I was, like, all these years in prison thinking that I was going to get to go back to being just local, anonymous, like, Seattle college student. And I very quickly realized that world and that life didn't exist anymore. And that not only had I changed over the course of 4 years, but the world around me had changed as well. And I had to forge a new relationship with it. And I'll be honest, it was hella awkward. It's awkward. It's awkward when people know you for the worst experience of your life, and they think they know things about you because they've gone through the experience of living your trauma through the stories that have been told about it. And, like, I didn't know what stories other people had absorbed about me. I knew that there was this figure, this idea of Amanda Knox that was out there, this idea of Foxy Knoxy. But I also knew that idea preyed upon or played upon people's expectations or their own, what they were projecting onto that image of me. And so I felt like there was this constant doppelganger version of me that existed between me and other people. And it meant that paranoid hypervigilance that I had lived with in prison came with me outside of prison, and I entered into a new phase of feeling trapped by, like, this dark cloud that was hanging over me.
I wonder if one of the things you talk about is how scrutinized every action that you did while you were on trial was looked at. You talk about how you wore a T-shirt on Valentine's Day that said, "All you need is love," and people thought you were being flip. You wrote, in your latest memoir, Free, that when you smiled at your family, you were seen as kind of vamping for the cameras. Or if you didn't smile, you were seen as cold and calculating. And so nothing you could do was right. Your family suggested at one point that you start wearing a cross when you went to court because they knew how closely you're being watched. What was the cross going to do?
Well, in Italian courtrooms, there's a big cross hanging above the judge, and so it was. They understood that part of what was happening to me was a lost in translation, cultures colliding kind of issue, and they wanted people to see me for who I really was, and they noted that the way that I was being represented was through this very stereotypical misogynistic lens. I was the American girl gone wild. I was the drug-addled whore. This is PBS. I don't know what I'm allowed to say here.
I think you've already done it.
Okay, it's already done. Sorry, children. What are you doing listening to criminal podcast anyway? I blame your parents. Where was I? What was I even talking about?
You were talking, you whore.
Yeah.
And, that in Italy, you were the, I'll say it, you were the slut.
Yes.
You were what a father wouldn't want their daughter to be.
Absolutely. And I think that the way that the case presented itself to the world was there are two versions of femininity. There is the victim who was pure and virginal, and then there's the perpetrator, the drug-addled whore. And when these two women come into contact with each other, what inevitably arises is a pornographic murder scene. And there was these assumptions about how women naturally hate other women, which I was just really unprepared for. I was 20 at the time, so I was really unprepared for the entirety of the thing. But it's taken me a long time to process how Meredith, my roommate and my friend, who met a brutal end at the hands of a man committed this crime, raped and murdered her, how that was twisted into a fantasy about women hating each other and women committing violence against each other. I've really had to, especially over these years, and in writing about it in this book, unpack what does it mean that women are the thing that's being sold to us is stories of women hating women, or women, even just the fact that my own identity has now become limited and diminished to the death of my friend. I feel like there's this, and I'm still unpacking it to this day, what does it mean that we want to reduce women this way and set up these standards and pit us against each other in this way? I'm still trying to figure it out.
And even when you got home, there was a Lifetime movie about you, and I think you watched it really closely because you were trying to see discrepancies.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was struck by one of the problems being just the cleavage on the Amanda in the movie, just the low cut. Well, what was it like just watching this version of yourself, all the things they were trying to do with who they wanted you to be?
I mean, it was surreal because, again, this was a version of me that didn't really exist. And so what I was really watching was a kind of sociological experiment. What was it that I was seeing what people thought the world wanted to see. What was the story that was being sold to an audience that was resonating with people enough for them to think, oh, this will sell a Lifetime movie. That is the character. It's not a real person. And I know that. But do other people know that? Do other people recognize that they're being sold a very small and stereotypical lie of a human being? I mean, that's the heady philosophical part of me. The gut non-philosophical part of me was like, what the fuck? And so mad and feeling like, how was I ever going to prove that was not who I was? And would I ever be able to do that? There was a period of time where I felt like the world had decided who I was and they were not going to let me escape from that box. And so I felt like there was no place for me, that my story ended there, and that I didn't have a hand in even writing it. I was not the protagonist of my own story. I was just the pawn in someone else's. And could I ever have a hand at reclaiming it and having any kind of agency, any kind of say?
Did you think when you got back home about just disappearing?
Well, that would have been an interesting option were it were available to me. I think that the helicopters following me back from the airport and then for the months afterwards, like I lived a pretty quiet, low down, trying to be as invisible as possible life. Like I got a job working minimum wage at a local bookstore that was literally underground because I was trying to disappear. And I often would move through places like not making eye contact with people, feeling really uncomfortable in big spaces, not putting myself out there unless it was to defend myself. And I found that despite all of my efforts to be invisible and disappear, there was a steady appetite for scandalous Foxy Knoxy content. And so I might, go to the store one day and the next day see that there's a tabloid article about how Foxy Knoxy's not so foxy anymore. Look at her go to the store in her glasses and short hair. Like I cut off all my hair. I wore big glasses. I was trying to be invisible, and the world wouldn't let me.
Now, Foxy Knoxy, the most unsexual thing possible, has nothing to do with anything salacious, that nickname.
Yeah, well, it's my soccer nickname. And, girls' soccer. All right. So we're talking 12-year-old girls who are giving each other nicknames. And it's like, sure, like we knew that there was something kind of like spiky about it, but we're 12-year-old girls. It rhymes. We're not that creative. It was not reflective of who I was as a person at 12. And so the fact that it then got twisted and got carried away, I think goes to show that there's in the interest of telling certain kinds of stories, there is an interest in cherry picking details and elevating them out of context, and then suppressing others that would give a more richer, grayer color to a black and white story. And we should all be mindful of that as storytellers and as consumers of stories.
You tried to disappear. It didn't work.
No.
So you wrote a memoir.
Yes.
Which may have put a bigger target on your back. What was that experience of what came after the memoir? And were you hoping that, okay, now I get a chance now. I get a chance to tell people?
Yeah, I mean, I was still on trial, so I still had a big old target on my back when I wrote the memoir. And I think what also made it difficult was I thought, memoir's happening. I get to finally tell my side of the story because there's been 1 million people out there already, 4 years in prison, where people are putting out there, who is Amanda Knox? What is her real story? What's her sex life? Like just getting really detailed, intimate about me as a person, not just about the case. And I felt like I needed to put my one voice out there to set the record straight and to clarify some things. And then the Italian justice system decided to overturn my acquittal right when my book came out. And so suddenly any interviews that I might have had that would have been about, oh, tell us your story about being wrongly convicted, turned into, did you or did you not murder your roommate, Meredith Kircher? And I had to go through that whole experience all over again of being interrogated by what I assumed were my authority figures, these people who I had seen on television, grown up watching on television. I didn't know what my relationship was to them. I didn't know, it felt like they had all the power to tell my story, and so I just had to show up and do exactly what they told me, which is the exact same mistake that I had made with the police. And I made some mistakes, and in trusting certain individuals to tell my story, in putting myself out there when I wasn't ready. I think that's a really big lesson that now that I'm in the criminal justice world and I talk to other wrongly convicted people about like the desire to tell your story, which is I think every one of us has a desire to have some kind of authorship over the arc of our legacy, who we are as a people, the life that we are living. And one of the things that is stolen from wrongly convicted people is this opportunity to have a say over who they are. Someone else created this big story where they're the villain. And they've lived through an experience. I lived through an experience. I learned from it. I wanted to have a say in that. But I was still put in the position of feeling like I had to prove my innocence instead of being able to talk about what I thought about everything, to have a broader perspective. And so one of the traps that I try to help other wrongly convicted people feel like they can avoid is that feeling that they are at the mercy of anyone who is telling their story, and that they do not need to rely on, even a professional journalist like myself to be a voice for them. And I really try to give them ideas about how they can think about their story, not just in terms of this happened, then that happened, and then that happened, so plot points, but in terms of a broader philosophical perspective.
I mean, did you think, you had been released from prison, you were reconvicted of murder, but then you were exonerated. Did you finally think in 2014, listen, this is 2 times now where it's not me, that this would be the end, that people would finally get it?
You'd hope, yeah. I mean, there absolutely was a moment, like the moment that I learned that no one was going to try to put me in prison anymore, obviously that was a huge moment emotionally for me and for my co-defendant Raffaele Sollecito, who was my boyfriend at the time, my alibi. He was still back in Italy, and police cars were camped outside of his house waiting to hear what the verdict was so they could go in and arrest him. Like, we were all on edge. And then we received this verdict that doesn't just, send what had happened. For the record, if anyone's not clear on what happened, I was convicted and then I was acquitted. And then I was convicted again because they just did the thing all over again. And then the Supreme Court in Italy overturned that and definitively acquitted us. And so it was an 8-year ordeal. And there was that period there between getting out of prison and it being definitively done where I could have been extradited back to Italy at any point. So this was like a very tense period, and also a very tense period for my co-defendant. And so yes, when that axe that was hanging over us was finally taken away, I had this moment of dawning realization that I wasn't just going to be surviving anymore. I wasn't just reacting to a bad thing that was taking over my life. I could really start to think about planting roots and being proactive and having relationships, getting a cat. You think, if someone's gonna maybe take everything away from you again, is it responsible for you to adopt a kitten or not? It's gonna end up at my mom's house. That's the stuff you think, those are the things you think or don't think about. And so once that was over, that was, very shortly after I met the man who eventually became my husband. And that was great because it was one of the first times where I met someone out in the wild like one does, and thought, oh my gosh, I can make friends with people now like a normal person. At the same time, and I don't know if you want to get into all the legal quirks, but Italy acquitted me of having anything to do with my roommate's murder, right? They did not say Amanda wasn't there. They left open the possibility that I was present when this crime occurred and that I witnessed it, not that I participated in it, which is just absurd, because if you try to imagine what that would be, basically they had proof that I lived in my house, and I think what they were trying to do was accommodate the fact that the police and the prosecution had made a huge mistake, and they didn't want to embarrass them by saying, you guys are completely wrong. So they were like, okay, well, maybe she was there and that's why you got it wrong. And so what that meant, though, was that as soon as that idea remained, maybe she was there when it happened, it meant that I was the liar, that I was lying when I said I wasn't there, that I was keeping information from the world that would have revealed the truth of what had happened to my roommate, and I was just choosing not to tell it. So it left me in this very vulnerable position, and also left me with a remaining lesser conviction. They convicted me of a lesser crime, which was falsely accusing an innocent man. And the basis of that being, if she was present, she knew who had committed this crime, she knew that it wasn't this other person, and therefore she is guilty of this crime.
We'll be back with Criminal, live at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival, after this.
BECU. You've heard the name, seen the letters. But what does BECU stand for? Simply put, not-for-profit BECU stands for people, for charting your own path, for choosing what's right for members instead of what's profitable for someone else, because they are the reason our credit union exists. So we do everything in our power to help them reach their financial goals. BECU, power in people. All Pacific Northwest residents are eligible to join, federally insured by NCUA.
Thanks to Amazon for the generous support as the host sponsor of the 2025 Cascade PBS Ideas Festival.
So I want to talk a little bit about still some legal things that are, as you say, going on. So earlier this year, Italy's Supreme Court upheld your conviction for slandering your former boss, Patrick Lumumba,
Yes.
during your interrogation.
Yes.
You had named him as being involved in the murder. Looking back now, what do you think was happening in that interrogation room, and why do you think you did that?
Well, now, today, I know exactly what was happening in that interrogation room. And if anyone, there's very little time to get into all of it, but I did a really big multi-part series about false confessions on my podcast, Labyrinths, that I highly recommend everyone check out because of all the criminal justice advocacy issues that I'm very much in support of and I work for, and that I'm going down to the state, Congress and everything to advocate for, is police interrogation techniques. So what happened is the police, from the beginning, believed that the crime had been committed by someone who had access to the house. So they looked at this break-in that had happened. I called the police, reported a break-in, and my prosecutor, Giuliana Mignini, took one look at the crime scene and said, that is not a real break-in. That is a staged break-in. That is somebody trying to cover up for a crime. So assuming that, they then logically deduced that it was probably me, because I was the foreigner, I was the one who I was the first one to the crime scene, I was the one who was acting a little bit differently than other people, not realizing that I was the youngest and I didn't speak Italian, so I was struggling to understand what was going on. So from the beginning, the police and the prosecution were looking at me. No one else, they didn't tap their phones, they only tapped my phone. That's how we know. And then over the course of many days, they interviewed me, unbeknownst to me, more than anybody else. They brought me in for, I think, 53 hours of questioning over 5 days. So I was inordinate amounts of time at the police's disposal, answering their questions over and over and over again. And what they were doing over the course of those days was trying to get me to say things that were inconsistent. So they would ask me, okay, what time did you last see Meredith? Or what time did you have dinner that night? And I was, doing my best, making guesses. I wasn't looking at my clock the entire time. And at a certain point, upon hearing that my mom was going to be arriving in Italy, they realized that they had a last chance to get me to confess. And so they brought me in, and my boyfriend, who was my alibi, in the middle of the night. They separated us, and then they started a guilt presumptive interrogation process where they accused us, they bullied us, they lied to us, they gaslit us. They broke my boyfriend first. Apparently, he said, well, maybe I fell asleep and I can't account for where she was after I fell asleep. They come in and tell me, your boyfriend says that you weren't with him that night. And they tell me that I must have witnessed the crime, and it was so horrible that I couldn't remember it. I must have blacked it out. But there was proof that I had met with my boss, Patrick Lumumba, the night of the murder, because they found a text message on my phone where I had texted him back saying, hey, have a good night, see you later. He had told me I didn't need to come in that night for work. They interpreted that see you later as an appointment to meet him and said that was proof that I had met him that night and that I was covering for him. So over the course of hours and hours of being screamed at and lied to and slapped in the back of the head, like, I started to doubt my own sanity, and I started to believe what they were telling me, that I must have witnessed this crime and didn't realize it. And so I signed statements to those effects after hours. And then they let me sleep. And once I woke up from a sleep, I immediately told them, this is all wrong. I need to change my statement. They said it was too late. And so I asked for a piece of paper and a pen, and I wrote what is called my memoriale. It was my retraction. I retracted what I said, and then they took me off to prison. And I remain convicted for that crime to this day, which to them, what their definition of this crime is that I knowingly and willingly falsely accused a man I knew for a fact to be innocent. And that I didn't commit that crime. But what I did do was sign false statements under coercion.
One of the most interesting things I think that you did also do is start writing to the man who prosecuted your case.
Yes.
In Italy, Giuliano Menini. Someone who had been so certain of your guilt. Why did you start writing letters to him?
Yeah, that's a big part of the book. So waiting to be heard further. I've written 2 memoirs. It's like bad idea. 2 memoirs at 37, I don't think so, but So my first memoir is Waiting to be Heard, right? That came out in 2013 while I was still on trial. And again, like I said, it was very much in response to this crazy story that was being told about me about the case. And it was in response to that, right? Like, I was trying to set the record straight about this story that was being told about me, about something that ultimately I had nothing to do with, right? I wrote this memoir, Free, My Search for Meaning, because I finally realized, after having corresponded with my prosecutor and meeting with him in person, that I had actually finally done something and gone on this journey, this personal journey, that actually defined me. That it was no longer about this crazy story that happened to a girl when she was off in Italy. It was a story about now that you have a trauma and a grief in your life, how do you process that? And how do you confront the ongoing enmities in your life? I have an adversary. To this day, I have an adversary in my prosecutor who maintains that he did his duty, that he was in the right to do what he did, and as a result does not recognize that I experienced a grave injustice at his hand. And all these years, as I've tried to process his impact on my life, I've experienced him as a kind of boogeyman. Here's this man who had so much power over me, who set a course for my life that I am now going to face the consequences of forever. Like, I am forever proving my innocence in response to the accusations that he leveled against me, that in many ways derive from a certain kind of fantasy that he cooked up that was based on nothing. To give an example, his idea was that I was in a love triangle between the person who actually committed this crime, the murderer, Rudy Guedet, and my boyfriend, Raffaele. So he imagined that I was in this love triangle when there is zero evidence. Like, I did not know Rudy's name. We did not have each other's phone number. No one ever saw us together. Like, this idea that we had this love triangle going on was completely made up for the sake of justifying his accusation against me. That's just one of the many fantasies that he had to imagine in order to justify the accusation against me. So I know this person to be very dangerous, but do I know this person? Do I understand this person? I wanted to understand why he believed, why he looked at a 20-year-old girl who had never had anything bad happen to her in her life, who had never hurt anyone, who had no history of violence or criminal behavior or even a bad grade in school, and thought, there's my rapist and murderer. Why? Why was this my life? Why did he do this to me? And I think anyone who is hurt can resonate with that. Like, if someone hurts you, you want to know why. And you want to know if they care. And you want to know if they're sorry. And so at a certain point, I was just like, I should ask him. And I knew that if I confronted him the way that I had always encountered him, which was in this adversarial justice system, I wasn't going to get anywhere. He's a lawyer. He wants to argue. He wants to debate. What would happen if I approached him not with, fisticuffs, but with an olive branch? I reached out to him and I tried to imagine any kind of common ground that we might have, which is what I think is the building blocks to any actual discussion that you might have with another human being. You have to have a foundation of common ground. And so recognizing that this case blew up in the media and went out of control, and everyone had their own opinion about it, and there were lots of different sides, I thought, I bet he feels misrepresented too. And so when I reached out to him, I said, Dr. Mignini, I don't know who you are. And I don't think you know who I am. And I think we both have been misrepresented. And I really want to know who you are, and I want to understand you. And he responded, and to his credit, he responded. Because another thing that he could have done was completely ignored me, and he didn't. He at first thought that it might be illegal for him to even talk to me because in his, it was unprecedented. No defendant, as far as he knew, had ever reached out to their prosecutor to have a dialogue outside of the justice system. And so he first had to check and make sure that wasn't incorrect. And then he realized there was no law because, again, it was unprecedented. It's like, is it legal for you to talk to a unicorn? Who knows? It's like not in the law. And then finally, he started this discourse with me, and it just so happened to coincide with the pandemic. So my original intention of going there and meeting him in person and confronting him face to face was put on hold. And I don't know what you guys were doing during the pandemic, but I was corresponding with my prosecutor and talking about, the latest Star Trek episode with him and learning things about him outside of this criminal justice case that we had found ourselves enmeshed in. And he was deeply moved by the fact that I cared to know who he was and that I cared to give him the benefit of the doubt, to recognize his humanity, to be genuinely curious about him in ways that he had not been curious about me. And then, of course, came the moment when I finally booked that ticket and went to Italy, at this point with a daughter and a family. And, another huge through line in the book is my relationship with my mother, who has been my biggest supporter and my, the person who really deeply embedded in me this idea that I mattered and that my life mattered. This was the one time in her entire life where she did not want to support me. She did not want me to go back, and she did not understand this. She thought I was I had Stockholm syndrome or something. What is going, she was like, what are you doing? Why are you putting yourself back in danger? Why are you doing this to our family? Everything that this man has put us through, he is not worth it. And at the time, I didn't have the language to convey to her what I was attempting to do. I just had this deep feeling that I needed him to know who I was. And so I showed up. And, I don't want to give everything away. I hope you all get a copy of my book. But what I will say is that recognizing the humanity of another person or holding out an olive branch does not mean that you just forget about the bad things that they did to you. It does not. And it does not necessitate that. I showed up and I confronted him. I told him, you were wrong about me. I am innocent. And this is the level of pain that you have caused to me and my family and so many people that you do not know. But the flip side of that is that for me, like I said that, and then I also, and you are a person who I genuinely believe thought he was doing the right thing. I think you believed what you were doing. And so I don't think that you are a bad person. And you know what? I don't even hate you. I actually, in a weird way, am grateful to you, because there are things that I know about myself and the world now because of you. I am a better person because of what you did to me, and because I have the opportunity now to confront you. And his response was really interesting. And again, you'll have to read the book. To go back to the mom of it all, I told my mom all about it afterwards, and her response was, too little, too late. Not good enough. And my response to my mom was, it's not about him anymore. It's not about what he said or he didn't say, what he did or what he didn't do. It was about me and what I did and what I said and how I showed up. It's not his story anymore. It's not his story to tell anymore. And when my mom finally heard that, and I think it really clicked for her that she understood what I was doing. But at the same time, as I talk about in my book, I'm a mom now too. The minute that my daughter was born, I recognized that my mom's pain throughout this entire process was more than anything that I experienced. She would have taken everything upon herself if she could have. And so her anger and inability to forgive my prosecutor was deeper than mine and different than mine. And both of those things are valid at the same time. We can hold each other up and we can hold each other's pain even though they're different, and we have different ways of confronting them.
What do you want your children to know about what happened to you?
Well, I mean, I want them to know what they want to know. I really believe that kids should have, I believe in being transparent and honest with kids. But I think the more important thing, other than the gruesome details of it all, is simply the fact that when the worst happens, it does not limit you. It does not diminish you. It does not define you. Even when it feels like everything is going against you, one, know that I am here. I will always love you. And you matter. But two, you always have the means to define yourself and to define your life. There's nothing that can take that away. The only thing that truly diminishes you is allowing those external forces to inhibit your sense of yourself and your ability to interact with the world. I want my daughter to know how to be a survivor. And I feel like I can't just tell her that, I have to show her. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
But also,
Thanks.
But also there's a problem, because the problem was that something went wrong in the justice system, in the Italian courts, in the American media.
Yes.
And you can be as strong as you like as a survivor, right? But these things happen, how do you say to your children, yeah, it's really bad. It's like, we can recover, and we know when we can recover, but I can't assure you that the world works as it should.
Right, and sometimes we don't recover. There were 2 young women who went to go study abroad in Perugia, Italy, and only one of them survived to tell the tale. So sometimes we don't recover. And so far we haven't gotten into the nuance of that yet, because my daughter is 3. But she has started to ask me a lot about death. Because when I first started telling her about this story, I told her that someone hurt her friend. and everyone thought that Mama hurt her friend. But eventually she dug deeper into that and realized that my friend had died. And she didn't quite understand what that meant. And so we've had to have the conversation of like, dying is when there is no tomorrow. And I think she's still wrapping her brain around that. But like, to your point, like, it's going to take time for me to say, like, I will always be here for you, but that doesn't mean that the world is always going to be fair and that everything's always going to be all right. All I can tell you is that right now, in this moment, we are okay.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Amanda, for talking. This has been great. Amanda's book is here. As she said, it's called Free. There are copies of the book at the Elliott Bay pop-up, which is right outside of this room. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you again, Amanda.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you, Phoebe and Amanda, for the talk. This episode of the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast was produced by Sarah Bernard and Scott Michael. The live event was produced by Jake Newman and Ann O'Dowd. You can subscribe to this feed wherever you listen to podcasts, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. The Ideas Festival podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Join the members who help fund Cascade PBS original programs. Your donation will be put to work right away, delivering the lineup of podcasts, video docuseries, and daily in-depth reporting you and so many rely on. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive great member benefits, including Cascade PBS Passport, which provides extended access to an on-demand library of local and PBS favorites. Go to cascadepbs.org/ideasfestivalpod to sign up today. For the latest political, investigative, and cultural coverage from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. I'm Paris Jackson. We'll be back next week with a live session featuring travel expert Rick Steves.